Hello, this is Reverend Don Lewis coming to you from beautiful Salem. And tonight I want to take a question from a Navrin who asks, what books are in my library? And I have to start by saying that this is problematic as a question because my library is in central Illinois and I am in Salem, which I find endlessly frustrating. I am very proud of my library. I have a very large library. And in terms of the books that are in it, I would strongly suspect that most of them are not books that most people watching the vlog would recognize. But I do have some books here in Salem that I brought with me or brought out subsequently because they were of particular interest to me or importance, and I thought I would share those with you tonight. And one of them is this book called Treasures of Ancient Egypt. And it is basically a collection of photographs from the Egyptian Museum in Cairo. And what I like about the book, I'm an artist, and I love to, pardon, a little pile here, but I love to have good pictures of historical subjects that I might be doing artwork from. And I also like to use these for inspiration for contemporary artwork as well. And this book is just filled with just magnificent pictures. The text isn't all that great, but the pictures are wonderful. And you can learn a great deal by studying the artwork of any given culture. And Egypt is one of my great loves. So this is one of the books that you would find in my library. Another one, we're going to be a little Egypt heavy tonight because that's what I happen to have here, but Conversations with Mummies. And I highly recommend this book as being a very interesting book. It's written by Rosalie David, who is a very prominent Egyptologist, and she has a lot of interesting things to say that you probably wouldn't normally think about in terms of mummies and in terms of ancient Egypt. It's a fascinating book, particularly in the things it has to say about diet and disease in ancient Egypt. And also it too has wonderful photographs illustrating it. And again, in my opinion, I learn as much sometimes from the photos as from the text. The thing I particularly like about Conversations with Mummies, however, is that Rosalie David, among other things, is the successor to Margaret Murray at the Manchester Museum. And she talks at great length about Margaret Murray and what a highly respected Egyptologist the lady was. And I think that's very important because people often forget that Murray was a highly respected Egyptologist, a highly respected scholar, in their rush to disassociate themselves from her theories about witchcraft. And I really don't think that it's at all an even-handed treatment that she gets. The same is true for Leland, by the way. If you ever look up Charles Leland as a philologist, you'll find glowing opinions of him in academia versus what they sometimes think about his theories of witchcraft. We also have the Encyclopedia of Ancient Egypt, and this is a very interesting volume in that it is not a big budget volume like the others. And what makes this fascinating is it talks about ordinary aspects of life that you don't necessarily get to read about in most books. I believe it's primarily aimed at children. And I've found that when dealing with historical subjects, books that are aimed at children are often much more in-depth in certain ways than books that are aimed at adults, because the authors do not make the assumption that the children know anything about the culture. And so they explain things in much more embracing terms than will sometimes be the case in books focused on an adult audience, which will take a more narrow view. So those are 3 books on Egypt that I happen to have here in Salem. We also have Gods, Demigods, and Demons, which is by Bernard Evslin, which is actually possibly my favorite one of my favorite books. I've had this book probably since it was published. I've had it since I was a child. And it too is a children's book on Greek mythology, but it's also one of the most exhausting encyclopedias of Greek mythology I have ever seen, and also explains it in very simple terms. I certainly wouldn't recommend it as a book to read for Greek theology, but for Greek mythology it's wonderful, and very, very handy reference book. So those are some of the kind of books that I tend to keep. The question also asks some of my favorite authors. And, I don't... I'm sure the question really wants to ask about my favorite authors on the subjects of metaphysics. And I think that probably is a subject for another day, but I will say that Cunningham is one of the best that has written, in terms of his accessibility to people and his willingness to break things down in understandable terms. And in terms of the kind of fiction I like, I don't read a lot of fiction. When I do, it's likely to be for some unusual reason. I was reading Laurel Hamilton for a while, and I like Laurel Hamilton. I just don't have time to read any more of it at this particular juncture in life. I used to read Anne Rice periodically. But Tanith Lee is actually one of my favorite fiction writers, or at least in particular her book, The Silver Medal Lover, I enjoyed tremendously. But I tend to like more historical books, and recently was rereading a collection of Poe, which is, I have very much liked Poe's work. But those are the kind of things that you'd find in my library, and just kind of a little chatty video tonight, and I hope you enjoyed it, and until next time, may you blessed be.